Good afternoon. I'm Jana Rudler, the Grants and Technical Services Manager for the Preservation League of New York State. And today we're going to learn about technical assistance grants and Preserve New York grants for 2025. I'll give you all a moment to get comfortable and then we'll get started. Some housekeeping first. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to all registrants and on our website afterward. So if you have to pop out early or if you want to share this webinar later, you can do so. If you're not familiar with the Preservation League of New York State, we've been around for just over 50 years, founded in 1974 as the statewide nonprofit organization working for historic preservation. We provide advocacy, grants. We collaborate with our preservation colleagues all across the state to make sure that everyone's got the tools that they need to use historic preservation in their neighborhoods and towns. We provide awards for excellence in historic preservation every year, and we highlight endangered properties through our 7 to Save program, which just celebrated its 25th year. Our virtual programs are available on our website, and it's a good idea to sign up for our e-newsletter, which you can find right on our homepage at preservenys.org, and that will keep you up to date on all of our fantastic offerings, and you will never miss a grant opportunity if you subscribe to our newsletter. We offer historic preservation planning grants through the Technical Assistance and Preserve New York grant programs. These programs are both a re-grant of the New York State Council on the Arts with additional support from the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation for projects on Long Island and the Maurice D. Henchy Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area for technical assistance grants occurring in the Hudson River Valley Greenway. So we've got some fantastic grant partners. We're very grateful, especially for the New York State Council on the Arts, without whom these grant programs simply would not be possible. So this year, things are a little different. You might remember from previous years, a long time ago, we would offer technical assistance grants in the spring and the fall and Preserve New York grants once a year in the spring. Then we changed that to offer TAG in the fall and P&Y in the springtime. And this year we're trying something a little bit different. These grant programs are really similar, and there are some key differences that we'll talk about, but we're offering them both this spring. So these grants just opened today, and you will be able to apply through the deadline of April 18th. So you've got a little extra time from last year. And so let's talk about some things that are similar and different between these grant programs, and then some new guidelines that we have this year. So if you think you know all about these grant programs, just listen up and you'll probably learn something new today. Technical assistance grants are intended for small historic preservation projects. TAG supports first actions, small spaces, discrete standalone projects with a quick turnaround. So if you've got a particular concern with your building, something you need to address quickly that involves some specific aspect of your building, then TAG would probably be the best way to go for you. The eligible projects through TAG are accessibility studies, structural analyses, limited condition assessments, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing assessments, specialized conservation studies, and we will go over each of these in great detail in just a moment. And new this year, we're offering energy efficiency studies and energy audits under TAG. We've done iterations of those in the past on a small scale, but we're looking to expand that category. Preserve New York, on the other hand, is for larger scale projects. So we're talking about large scale comprehensive projects for your historic building or site that precede major rehabilitation projects. So if you're looking at a capital campaign, then You probably want to start with a PNY grant to help you find your way through prioritizing projects and fundraising for them. Eligible projects under Preserve New York include building condition reports, historic structure reports, cultural landscape reports, and then cultural resource surveys and National Register district nominations as well. So you'll see some new guidelines this year for technical assistance grants. We've upped the grant amount to $7,500 maximum for TAG, and we've lowered the match to $500, like it used to be a long time ago, pre-COVID match. So this should make technical assistance grants a little more useful and a little more accessible for organizations to apply for. And again, these proceed specific repairs and limited rehabilitation projects. And the deadline this year is the same as Preserve New York, April 18th. Preserve New York grants are available for up to $20,000 toward your preservation planning project. Applicants are required to provide a 20% cash match, and that's 20% of the project total. And by project, I mean the study or the report that you are applying for. So for instance, we will cover up to 80% of the project cost, and you will have to pick up the rest. A minimum 20% cash match, it could be more if you've got a fairly expensive project. These projects are intended to precede major capital projects or community preservation planning, and the deadline is the same for TAG, April 18th. All right, my slides are acting up. All right, so who can apply for TAG and Preserve New York? Our grant programs are open to 501c3 nonprofit arts and cultural organizations. We're talking about museums, historical societies, arts councils, guilds, collectives, and galleries, theaters, performing arts groups, and historic preservation organizations. Municipalities are also welcome to apply, but under specific circumstances. So if a municipality owns a historic resource that's used primarily for public-facing arts and cultural purposes, and then municipalities may also apply for cultural resource surveys and national district nominations. Please keep in mind that applicants need to have closed out any prior Preservation League grants before applying. So if you're not sure if you have an open grant, you can always ask me, but we only allow one grant at a time per applicant. So what kind of buildings and historic resources are we looking at here? So we are focusing on historic buildings and resources that have a primary arts and cultural purpose. Keep in mind that our grants are a re-grant program from the New York State Council on the Arts, so we are very much aligned with their mission to promote public access to the arts. So keep that in mind. We do not require listing on the state and national register. However, we do require that the building be historic with a small h, which basically means 50 or more years old. So if your building was built in 1974 or before, isn't that crazy? It's considered historic. So keep that in mind for those wonderful mid-century modern examples of architecture. Your building must be owned. This is important. It must be owned by a 501c3 nonprofit organization or municipality. Hard stop. Okay, so our grant programs are not open to privately owned buildings or buildings owned by fraternal organizations, LLCs, anything like that. We also cannot fund buildings that are owned by anything other than a 501c3 specifically nonprofit organization. So no 501c4s, 501c13s, et cetera. This is an important point because I know things can be complicated for arts organizations. Sometimes I know of one leasing a building from an LLC. Unfortunately, we cannot fund their building. So keep that in mind. The building must be owned by a 501c3 or municipality. The applicant can either be the building owner or can be the building occupant that holds a long-term lease, stewardship agreement, or memorandum of understanding. So we want to know that you have site control over that building. You can do work to that building, and you have the permission to do so. As far as leases and stewardship agreements, MOAs, there should be at least 6 years remaining in that agreement at the time of application, and the longer the better. So 6 years is the absolute minimum. Before I move on to our funding priorities, I'm going to check the Q&A. Forgot to mention, if you have questions, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A. And we do have a question relating to what I was just talking about, so this is important. Can a church apply if it's a 501c3? That's a really great question. And unfortunately, the answer is no, and I'll tell you why. Our grant programs are not open to religious organizations, at least not these grant programs. So NISCA regrant programs cannot fund religious organizations, even if you have a 501c3. However, stay tuned. Later in this year, we will open our Preservation Opportunity Fund, which is our in-house grant program. We do allow that scenario. So Robert, POF, Preservation Opportunity Fund, you would be able to apply for that. So questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. And I'll be presenting a webinar and workshops on POF later in the year. So we're looking at summertime for that. Another question, can park spaces, sorry about that. Can park spaces with arts and cultural programs apply? Maybe, probably. So our grant programs, I haven't quite gotten to that point yet, but our grant programs are not open to New York State owned properties. So as long as it's not a New York State park, then if you have robust arts and cultural programs, it'll be up to you to make that case in your application. But if you are a 501c3 or a municipality with a park space with arts and culture programs, then we could certainly entertain a pre-application from you and explore that further. So the pre-application process is the first step in applying. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I think it's important to speak to your questions. And in the pre-application process, I'll be able to look a little more closely to your organization, your resource, and your project, and then we can go from there. So Martina, to answer your question concisely, probably yes. We'll say yes for now, and then we'll talk about it. Can a school apply if it's a 501c3 charter school? Unfortunately, school districts are not eligible. We would have to talk about that further, though. A 501c3 school, I don't think so. But let me look into that, Gina, and I will let you know. And this is probably a good time to mention that our full grant guidelines are available on our website, so you can kind of dig through those. We have the finer points of who is and is not eligible to apply there. And you can find some more answers there, but to answer your question, Gina, I'm really not sure. I think it would depend on your purposes and your mission. Again, we focus on arts and cultural organizations with these grants. It's hard to make that case with a school sometimes, strange as that sounds, but all right. So let's move on to, I have a question. Oh boy. All right, I have a question from, I don't know if I can, yeah, Caroline, do you have a question? And it looks like you're muted, but feel free to ask your question.
No.
If you would rather, yes.
How to do it.
There you go.
Go ahead. This is also clear. I don't have a question yet.
Okay. If you do have a question, you can put your hand up or put it in the Q&A. I'm happy to answer it. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks.
All right. Andrew, I think you have a question.
Indeed, I do. Hopefully you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Thank you. And thank you for organizing this opportunity for us to learn more about the various grants of the League.
My pleasure.
I've been looking back since 2002, and speaking about priorities, Nassau County on Long Island has only been a recipient for reconnaissance surveys in 2008, 2018, and 2004. and the last two were the same place. There are a lot of communities that are really generally had no support for preservation are now starting to get interested in it, and they'd like to be surveyed. How
Yeah.
do you figure out what sort of priorities to place on areas that have never had these surveys when looking at the holistic sort of balance of where money is going to go throughout the state, realizing limited budgets?
Well, that's a really great question, Andrew, and there are a couple different possible answers to that. So the first thing I would say is to look at the eligibility guidelines for our Preserve New York grants with regard to cultural resource surveys and National Register nominations, because that can help you point to communities that might best fit those guidelines. Another way to look at it is to call upon the folks at Preservation Long Island to help you prioritize those communities. They're much more familiar with the pressures that you all face there on Long Island, and they can help you prioritize from that too, because you know, I understand the urgency to survey some of these communities that are a little more under some development pressures, to put it mildly. And there are other ways to accomplish cultural resource surveys, even outside of our grant program. So I don't want you to feel constrained by what you see today here. Rather, think of it as, you know, how this grant program can address some of the communities that you're looking at, and then the other ones you'll, you know, have to find other resources for, and they do exist, and we can talk about those too. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yes, thank you.
Certainly, and we can always talk more offline. You know, I'm always happy to talk with folks about your projects because it can be complicated, and the way that they fit in or do not fit in with our grant programs is sometimes not entirely clear at first. So you know, we'll do our best to make sure that that you get your questions answered. All right, let's move on. So for both of our grant programs, we have some funding priorities in place. These priorities were developed in-house at the Preservation League as we look at projects that we've funded in the past and projects we would like to fund now and in the future. The New York State Council on the Arts has done similar things internally at their organization. So we've come together with two funding priorities to focus on for 2025. These may look familiar because they are the same ones that we focused on last year. So projects that identify and preserve histories and places and cultures associated with underrepresented communities. That's high on our list. Trying to tell a fuller history and identify some communities that may have been overlooked in the past. And also projects that address issues of social justice, diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. And you can find definitions of underrepresented communities and a little more detail on this in our grant guidelines. We're also looking at projects that respond to challenges uniquely created by climate change. You'll see some examples at the bottom of the screen. One particularly alarming one is the Peter Crippen House there. And it actually checked both boxes for us. The building is sinking into the ground due to rising water levels, water table levels, and it also tells an important story about Black history. If you get a chance to check it out, I highly recommend. The building is still under study for dismantling and relocation, and that was the target of its TAG grant to see if the building could withstand that. Believe it or not, it can and will. For more information on that particular project, you can reach out to the Huntington African American Museum. This building is intended to become part of that museum, and they're telling a really important story there in Huntington on Long Island. So we're really proud to have funded that. The rest of these projects here meet those priorities in one way or the other. On the far left is the N. Oliver House in New Paltz, which we just gave a TAG grant to a few days ago. It seems like a few days ago. Technical assistance grants usually roll around once a year, but you've got an opportunity this spring to apply again, even though we just closed out our TAG round from last fall. All right, so let's talk about a little more in depth about the projects that we fund through, specifically through technical assistance grants. So this year we have a new category, the energy efficiency studies and audits. We'll talk a little about that. But again, these are discrete projects looking at one particular challenge you're facing with your building, a maintenance issue or a repair issue or a conservation issue. And you see on your screen some historic um, stencils that were undergoing conservation. And while we don't fund the conservation of stencils themselves, we do fund studies that investigate the best ways to go about maintaining and preserving those stencils on your historic site. So it's an important distinction to make that our grants do not fund capital costs, construction costs, repair costs, but it does fund those important studies that help you identify the best ways to tackle these challenges with your building. This year, technical assistance grants, we are entertaining requests up to $7,500 for TAG. The applicant must provide a $500 cash match, and the project itself should not exceed about $8,000. So that's the guidelines for this year that have been updated. Happy to answer questions about that if any arise, but that is in response to feedback we've received in the last few years. All right. Accessibility studies. So this is a study of the existing conditions for your building or site, and will offer you options to improve accessibility, including ADA compliance. Your report will include recommendations, best guess cost estimates, and you usually will hire a preservation architect to do this study. The example that we have here is the Rare Center for Immigrant Culture and History in Kingston. They have received a number of grants from us over the years, and one of the most recent was a TAG grant in 2023 for an accessibility study. Their building presents some pretty unique challenges to getting folks in to tour the historic bakery, and they need some guidance for how to remediate those trip hazards and precarious stairways and things like that. So they have been working with architect Marilyn Kaplan for many, many years on this building, and they're making progress every year. If you get a chance to visit, you really should. But we're looking forward to see their site become more accessible. Engineering structural analyses, these look at issues that might be affecting the structure of your building. If you have an issue with the foundation, if you have a wall that's cracking and you don't know why, if your building's looking a little lopsided, anything like that, anything that indicates there may be a structural issue, then you'll want to have a structural engineer come in and take a look at it. One of the intents of our grant programs is to be sure you get professional eyes on your building. And so we do provide a list of qualified preservation architects and engineers to choose from. You can choose your own. You don't have to choose from our list. My point here is that when you choose a qualified professional who works specifically with historic buildings, you can be sure that nothing terrible is going to be done to your building to compromise its historic integrity. So with regard to engineers, sometimes you may want a team that includes a preservation architect and an engineer. That's not always the case, but we've seen that at times. This is one way to ensure the stability of your structure. You can look at a load figures for your floors if you're looking to reuse a space and you want to know if it can handle the increased traffic or anything else like that. So an engineering structural analysis can help you figure all that out. All right. Another thing that we fund through technical assistance grants is the limited condition assessment. So this is looking at a specific issue with your building, an item of specific concern, to include recommendations for repair or remediation and best guess cost estimates. This can include small-scale maintenance plans for your building, prioritize recommendations for maintaining that specific issue or making specific repairs. In this case, on your screen, we funded Sculpture Center's limited condition assessment. Their specific concern, should be obvious in these pictures, was flooding. So they had increasing water infiltration into their gallery spaces. And they suspected that it had something to do with the increase of construction projects going on around them. But they really needed to find a solution to stop the water from coming into their building. So TAG helped fund an assessment of this issue. They were able to hire experts who made recommendations to stop the water from coming in. So a pretty urgent project that we were proud to be able to fund. Another example of a limited condition assessment is a window conditions assessment, such as the one that took place for the Niagara County Historical Society, thanks to a TAG grant in 2023. So if windows are specifically an issue with your building, you can have them assessed for conditions and recommendations for repair. So we always recommend that you repair, not replace historic windows in your building. If at all possible, please save them. If you look closely at this picture, and I do believe they have external storm windows over their historic windows, it's always a good idea. So sometimes you can take measures to make your historic windows last longer and be more efficient. And storm windows are often the way to go. And if you're not sure how to make your windows more efficient or safer to use, then window conditions assessment might be right for you. All right, so I had a question, I noticed. What is an MEP analysis? That's a great question. So we're going to talk about it now. This is an analysis of the mechanical, electrical, or plumbing systems in your building. This can include fire suppression and HVAC. So if you're looking to upgrade your HVAC system or get one to begin with, if you don't have a decent HVAC system, if you're worried about fire in your building and you want to know how to install a fire suppression system, then an MEP analysis can help you with that. This usually is completed by a specialized contractor who knows about these systems. But having a preservation architect to oversee the project is important because, as we all know, historic buildings present their own challenges, and we really don't want to do anything wrong by our historic buildings. So this analysis can ease your mind, help you understand what needs to happen to upgrade those systems in your building safely, and then it'll give you an idea of what it'll cost so you can start fundraising for it. All right, so I mentioned that this year we've added in energy efficiency studies and energy audits as an allowable project under TAG. Now, we have funded these in one way or another in the past on a small scale. So you'll see this picture of the Hudson Athens Lighthouse, which received a TAG grant from us just last year for an MEP analysis. And what it focused on was upgrades to their electrical system. And that included a study for solar. So they were looking to see what the feasibility was of installing solar panels on their historic building. And upgrading the electrical service, and the best way to do that with their unique challenges being located in the middle of the Hudson River. Now we've got an entire category for these studies because we really want to encourage organizations to look at how they can increase the energy efficiency of their buildings. This can also help keep the lights on, as it were. I mean, we've all said we want money just to keep the lights on. Well, this can make that more affordable and help make your organization more sustainable in the long term. One thing that I don't think we've ever funded specifically before is insulation studies. So we all know that historic buildings present their own challenges with regard to being warm, easy to heat, things like that. But some modern insulation practices are not the best for historic buildings, so you need to be careful what kind of choices you make with regard to your historic building, and this can really help. So getting an energy audit or energy efficiency study performed by a specialized contractor with historic preservation experience specifically can help you do right by your building and become more energy efficient in the meantime. We do have some information on our website about energy conservation for historic buildings. There is a reference study to look at to give you a little bit of inspiration. Feel free to check that out on our website. And finally, specialized conservation studies is something else we fund under TAG. Examples can include hazmat remediation studies. I mentioned the Rare Center in Kingston earlier. They also got a TAG grant for a hazmat remediation study. So did the Ann Oliver House in New Paltz just last year. So this looks at what needs to happen to make spaces fully usable and to eliminate things like mold, asbestos, and other hazardous materials that may be in your space. So if you're looking at those kinds of challenges, then a specialized conservation study may be what you need. We've also funded acoustics analysis to make performing arts spaces better and without obscuring the historic integrity of the building. Historic paint analysis falls under the category of specialized conservation studies. Masonry mortar analysis, because historic masonry and historic mortar are very different from modern materials, and using modern mortar materials on historic masonry can be really detrimental to your building. So it's important to get an analysis of the proper mortar to use for things like repointing and masonry repair. LiDAR scans. So this is a neat new technology. I don't know how new it is. It's new to me. We funded one of these LiDAR studies for the Center for Environmental Education and Seed on Long Island. I'm blanking on it. Anyway, you can find our previously funded studies on our website. Browse through those and see what I mean. But LiDAR is pretty cool. And it can be a non-invasive way to get a look at the interstitial spaces in your building and help plan for repairs and restoration rehabilitation projects. All right, so these specialized conservation studies, this is a fairly flexible project type. So if you have an idea of something that may fit into this category, you can always give me a call and we can talk about it. Check out our previously funded studies and our grant guidelines for more guidance. All right, before we talk about Preserve New York grants, I'm going to check the time. We're going over a lot of material today. So again, this is being recorded for better or for worse, and you'll be able to refer to it later. But let's check out some questions that we've received. Oh boy. Okay, this is quite a question. Let's check this out. Okay, can a space that may be used for arts and cultural purposes be eligible for a municipality if it's not yet in existence? They're looking to plan to make it happen. Unfortunately, that's not within the scope of our grant program. So interesting question. Boy, that would be different. And I'd be happy to talk with you about this project. It sounds like, maybe you're looking for some guidance or some funding to help make this arts and cultural facility happen. And that's awesome. It just doesn't fall within the realm of these grants. Okay, so can historic preservation, let's see. Can a historic preservation organization which owns a formerly active church building qualify for a preservation grant? That's a good question too. We see that a lot, and it really depends on the ownership and the use of the building. So as long as that, let's see, and you already said it owns it. So your historic preservation organization that owns that building, if they are a 501c3, the first part of that question is yes. What is the building being used for? We're looking specifically for arts and cultural purposes. So you'll have to kind of, make your case in your application. Feel free to submit a pre-application for this one. We see former church buildings being used a lot for arts and culture. So that's intriguing, but yes, the short answer is yes. We answered the MEP question. I also had a prompt to mention something that's important coming up. I'm sure you all have heard about um, the semi-quincentennial coming up across the country. And if you're preparing your building for events, programs, or celebrations pertaining to that commemoration, I urge you to apply. That also is something that, while we didn't have it listed under our funding priorities, it's something that we're very interested in helping with. So if your organization has something like that going on, please, I encourage you to apply. All right. So I have a question about structural integrity issues. Is it still important to base the request in connection with the funding priorities listed? All right. So that's a good question. What does our funding priorities have to do with a structural issue in your building? It all goes back to the intent and purposes of our grants, which there are many. Okay. So the New York State Council on the Arts is interested in increasing public access to the arts. That's important to them. It's important to their re-grant programs. And we are looking to preserve buildings within that framework. So it may seem odd to have to speak to those funding priorities when it comes to your structural integrity issues, but we are looking, to fund within our missions. I hope that makes sense. Funding priorities are not requirements. And I should point that out at this point. If you don't meet those funding priorities, you won't necessarily get scored down for it. If you do meet them, you'll get scored up. So those funding priorities will rise to the top of our list if all other things are equal. But if you don't meet the funding priorities, and if it's just not on your radar screen right now, please still apply, because there's lots of variables that go into our review and scoring of these grant applications. And funding priorities are important, but they're not essential to applying. Okay, so don't let that scare you. And please give those priorities some thought. Sometimes you may not think you meet the priorities, but you might. So make a case, be honest, but make your case if you can. Okay, please expand on what 250th events you might support. Good question, Mark, but we're not supporting events. We're just supporting your building. So I'm sorry for the confusion. If you're looking for funding for 250th events, you'll want to look at programming grants from the New York State Council on the Arts or from your local funders. We don't support events exactly, but if you have events planned and you need to prepare your building for those events, that's where we come in. So let's say you have a space that's not handicap accessible. You really want to make it accessible in time for your big 250th event. Tell us that in your application. If your building is currently not really usable because of its condition, but you want it to be usable by then, tell us about that. Tell us what you have planned and why it's important to prepare your building for it. Okay, I hope that answers your question. All right, let's move on to Preserve New York. So Preserve New York is our other grant program that supports preservation planning projects. These are big, comprehensive projects to precede major rehabilitation projects. These are things you're going to want to fundraise for capital projects later. It's a good way to get started. So just like TAG, Preserve New York often jumpstarts these projects and gets you ready to fundraise and ready to tackle all the things that need to happen for that rehabilitation project. We fund building condition reports. These are comprehensive reports for your building, as opposed to the limited condition reports that only focus on one little specific aspect. So these are comprehensive. Historic structure reports, those are like building condition reports, but with the added benefit of historic research about your building. And we'll go into more detail in a moment on these. Cultural landscape reports look at the landscape around your building. Cultural resource surveys and National Register nominations. We'll fund up to $20,000 toward any of these. You are required to provide a 20% cash match of the project amount. So if your historic structure report, and these tend to be expensive, if your historic structure report is going to run you $80,000, we'll fund up to 20% of that, but you need to tell us how you're going to fund the rest. We don't want our money to go into a bucket and never get used. These projects have a timeline on them, and you need to have a plan in place for funding them. It's also possible to phase your projects. So if you have a large project, like a cultural resource survey or a cultural landscape report or a historic structure report that's going to require a lot of different phases and steps, you can phase these projects and apply for grants to cover specific phases as you go. All right. So, Caroline, do you have a question?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. I saw your hand up. I'm sorry. I must have.
Oh, how did I do that again? Yeah, no. No, I'm
Yeah.
listening very carefully, although maybe I can right now.
Okay.
You know,
Sure.
with all these, with all the threats from the current in administration in the White House, they can get ahead with, go ahead and threaten or get rid of even funding from at the federal level, or
Mhm.
work to do that. Is there anything in that mix? The Preservation League usually these grants are all state funding or private donors in New York State.
Yeah.
Is there anything going on right now that you're concerned with that affects these grants coming from all these proclamations out of the White House?
That's a really good question, Caroline. And I was kind of anticipating that someone might ask, and I'm glad you did. Because it's keeping me awake at night too. We are all a little concerned about that.
Mhm.
One thing that I've been doing lately is looking to our national partners for guidance. So the National Trust for Historic Preservation,
Yeah.
the National Endowment for the Arts, they send out statements periodically about how they're dealing with these threats. It provides a little bit of peace of mind. It's scary. It's a scary time for sure. We
The
don't yet
trust,
know.
the trust just sent something out about
Yep.
2 hours ago. I read it
Oh,
quick,
okay.
and they actually have scheduled some kind of an online thing, symposium. Can you
Okay.
hear me? On the
Yes.
12th of February.
Oh,
Unfortunately,
great.
I'm on an airplane that day, but it looks like they're really, taking all this on in the most careful way they can.
Indeed. And that's the strength that our national partners have, is that they've got kind of a finger on the pulse of what's
Mm.
going on. We're kind of taking a wait and see approach at the moment. I can't speak for our president, Jay. He's following this closely, as you probably know, and but we're kind of waiting to see what our national partners are doing. There are organizations and lawyers who are meeting these threats head on, and doing what they can to stop them. So right now we're just waiting to see. Yeah. Yeah.
But so far, these funds look like they're state funds or, private funds merged with
Yeah,
state.
and a lot of these funds are already there. So we actually can't announce a grant round like this until the funds are available. So that provides a little peace of mind, I hope, for everyone.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
thank you.
you're welcome. All right. So Preserve New York grants. Let's move on and talk about specific projects. Building condition reports, as I mentioned, comprehensive. These are big reports to encompass your entire building. If you don't know where to begin with maintenance, or you don't know where to begin with a rehabilitation project, should the roof be done first? Should you address that issue with the foundation, the windows? This can help you prioritize your project and know where to start, what it's going to cost, and how to fundraise for it. So these are important planning documents for your organization. These can inform your long-term maintenance and preservation planning for your building or site. Um, uh, in this case, in Nassau County, we funded the Long Beach Historical Museum for a condition study of their building. They had never had anything like that done before. And our grants are oftentimes the very first step in any kind of repair or rehabilitation project that organizations encounter. So our grants are important for leveraging funds later too. So something to keep in mind. I know I've heard some organizations say, well, my board, they just want to skip this whole planning thing and go right to capital funding. They just want the money. They just want to get it done. You know, they're threatening to come in on the weekend and have their son-in-law work on it. No, just say no. You know, take the time, make the small investment into a planning project, and you will see the benefits of it. This will ensure that everyone's on the same page among your staff and board and stakeholders, and you all will see a unified way forward with your building. So I cannot stress enough the importance of a preservation plan for your building. Cultural landscape reports. So this is kind of an interesting type of report that we fund. It looks at the landscape around your building. If you are planning any kind of work that's going to break ground and you want to make sure you're not disturbing any historic features that you might be able to interpret along with your historic house, then this is an important step to take. We've seen some amazing examples of cultural landscape reports that led to improvements that were just almost beyond belief. One project that we funded not long ago was the Oneida Community Mansion House. They were looking to expand their interpretation of their landscape to the Native community that lived there before the mansion house was ever there. So, you know, expanding their narrative of the history of the land and the use of the land. The Oneida community who came later, they also made use of the land for gardens and for agriculture and buildings that no longer exist, things like that. So in order to fully interpret their site, they needed this cultural landscape report to make it happen. So we were happy to fund that. These are usually completed by a landscape architect, and again, we can help recommend. We don't really recommend individual firms, but we do have a list that we can provide to help you choose. Yeah, before I move on to historic structure reports, I want to talk about another cultural landscape report that we funded for the Tenbrook Mansion, the Albany County Historical Association. I've talked about it before, you may have heard this before, but they had a carriage house that used to exist on their site. And they were wondering if maybe they might be able to use that in their interpretation. As they were broadening their historical interpretation, they wanted to talk about the workers on their site, people who worked in their stables, people who worked in the gardens, who worked in the house. They got a series of preservation planning grants to help them with this, a historic structure report to help them focus on areas of the house that they had never interpreted before. When they turned their attention to their landscape, they did this for a number of reasons, to expand their interpretation, but also for practical purposes of access and safety. So the fire department had informed them that if their mansion caught fire, they can't get fire trucks up there, and they may be SOL, as it were. So they had some real urgent concerns with their landscape and how to increase access to their site. And also they were finding that their visitors were a little confused, where to park, where to go for tickets, how to get a house tour. The way that you access their site is from the back. So do you go around to the front door of the house? Do you go through the back door? Their gardens are beautiful. They put a lot of effort into their gardens, but the public wasn't utilizing them. They were afraid to walk through the garden. Am I allowed to step there? Am I allowed to touch that? What is that plant over there? Things like that. They were addressing all this with a cultural landscape report, and the results have been amazing. They've leveraged grant funding to rebuild their carriage house that used to exist, to create a visitor center that is ADA accessible, to create a focal point for visitors. So they're, you know, eliminating confusion for their visitors. We all like to do that, increasing the visitor experience. So so many wonderful things going on at that site as a result of their cultural landscape report. We're very proud to have been a part of that, as you can tell. All right, historic structure reports are kind of like a cultural landscape report, except focusing on your building. So we're looking at existing conditions in your building, maintenance issues, structural issues, all of it. But it has the added benefit of historic research on your building, on the people who used to live there, the people who built it, you know, the architect. If your building was built in phases or underwent changes over the years, you want to know about those to help inform your interpretation of the building, but also any work that you may need to do on the building. So a historic structure report tends to be a little pricey. As I mentioned, you can phase these projects. It's always important to talk with your architect about, creating a historic structure report that will best serve your organization for many years to come. These reports can be useful for long-term planning, historic interpretation purposes. They can be the basis for a master preservation plan that can then be the basis for fundraising. So a historic structure report usually is not done unless there's a major capital or rehabilitation project coming up. So one thing you don't want to do is make the investment on a report of this caliber and have it sit on a shelf, because before you know it, in the blink of an eye, 20 years will pass and you will say, oh, it's outdated. We need to get it updated. And we do fund historic structure report updates, and that's fine. We're happy to do it because things change over the years, but make sure you make good use of that report while you have it and while it's fresh and new. If you're not ready to make good use of it, it may not be time yet. So, think about these grants and the timing of them. Is your organization ready to undertake what comes next? And if you're not quite there yet, then you may need to wait. Okay. And I'm always happy to talk with folks about this too, in planning to apply for these grants. You don't have to do it this year. Apply when the time is right. So let's take a breath and talk about cultural resource surveys next. Let me check my questions, make sure that I didn't forget anything. Oh, hey, I have an interesting question about cemeteries. So we hear a lot about historic cemeteries. Would an assessment of a cemetery be a cultural landscape report? It could be. All right, so by definition, cultural landscapes are places where people have altered the landscape for their purposes. It can be, you can take that how you will. It's pretty broad. We have funded cultural landscape reports for cemeteries before in the past. That said, it's a good idea to look at our grant guidelines first, because the arts and cultural focus of these grants comes into play. And if the cemetery, there are lots of things to consider about this. If the cemetery is owned by a cemetery association, those are not 501c3s. They're usually a 501c13 or 14, I forget right now, but something we cannot fund that. If the cemetery is municipally owned, so if it's a town cemetery, county cemetery, we may be able to fund it, but it has to have a really strong arts and cultural element. What does that mean? We mean a strong arts partner or cultural partner that conducts programs about the cemetery, in the cemetery, about history, genealogy, art, things like that. So there are lots of things to consider. Cemeteries are difficult for us to fund, quite frankly, because of all the considerations and eligibility requirements. However, it's worth discussing. The cemetery that we most recently funded for a cultural landscape report had drainage issues that were threatening the walkways, the monuments, everything. And they urgently needed to figure that out. The cultural landscape report helped them to create drainage solutions that did not endanger the cultural landscape. Some cemeteries were very intentionally planned, almost like parks. So they needed to preserve that historical aspect of their cemetery while maintaining it and keeping it from washing away. So I hope that helps. I apologize for the inexact nature of my answer, but some of these things need to be discussed and figured out. So if you need to discuss it further, I'm happy to do so. Cultural resource surveys. So we have funded these for many, many years. And please take a look at the grant guidelines, because we're focusing on neighborhoods, municipalities, areas that have a strong arts and cultural focus. We're talking about an anchor. that is an arts and cultural organization, a museum, an art gallery. We also look at cultural, as the name implies, right? Culturally important areas. In this instance, we funded the Historic Districts Council in New York City to conduct a cultural resource survey of the Little Caribbean neighborhood. And this focuses on the cultural importance of the neighborhood as viewed through the built environment. So this neighborhood contains a lot of historic buildings that have become culturally important to the people who live there. And so this study investigates that history and seeks to preserve and promote it. Another example of a cultural resource survey that we just funded last year is out on Long Island in the East End for the East Hampton Historical Farm Museum. Now they are the applicant, they are the sponsor of the program or of the grant, sorry. They were the applicant. But the focus of the study is the Freetown neighborhood. So this is a small little enclave. You could drive by it and not even know it's there except for their neighborhood house, which stands out front. But this neighborhood is under some development pressures, and it presents an important story of Long Island, of a settlement founded by freed African-American people and indigenous people together formed this neighborhood and basically scratched out a living. The way that it was presented to me was that they were kind of cast into the swamp. Yeah. And they managed to build a thriving community. That community is only visible in bits and pieces. As we all know, buildings come and go, right, over the years. So one of the most important things about this survey is that it's documenting the stories associated with this neighborhood as well as the buildings. So it all goes together to tell the history of Freetown. I can't wait to see how it turns out. Another example of a cultural resource survey that we're particularly proud of is Landmark West's Cultural Resource Survey of Public Art on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Some of this art is quite endangered. The horses on the left have been removed, but they were documented before that happened, thanks to this cultural resource survey. So public art is an important part of our neighborhoods, and surveys of that art are an allowable project through Preserve New York. Ha! We've covered a lot of ground, and it is 1 o'clock, so I'm not going to keep you much longer. This webinar is set to run through 1:30, so I want to entertain questions at the end, but let's talk real quick about how to apply. So you're excited about your project, you fit the eligibility guidelines. The first step in applying for any grant, our grants, others' grants, is to read the grant guidelines. These can change from year to year. So if you have an old copy, throw it in the trash and get the new copy. Make sure that you read those grant guidelines. It's really important. Once you have read and understood the guidelines, fill out a pre-application. It's a simple form on our website, and it helps us to determine your eligibility to apply. Once we review that pre-application, we'll send you a link to the full application. Now, in this case, something to keep in mind is the pre-application for TAG and for Preserve New York are the same. It's the same form. So if you go to the TAG page on our website and click on the pre-application link, it'll take you to the pre-app. You can fill it out. If you go to Preserve New York, click on the pre-application link, it takes you to the same form. So don't freak out. Like if you click from one of the pages and you decide to apply for the other kind of grant, it's okay. It's the same pre-application. So fill out that pre-application and I will guide you to the proper full application, whether TAG or Preserve New York. Okay. You will have the chance to preview the full grant application before you apply. If you look at it and decide this is not the year for you, that's fine. You are under no obligation. If you fill out a pre-application, if you're approved and then you decide not to apply, that's fine. You can let me know. It's okay. But in order to apply, you must do a pre-application first. The sooner the better. And get your foot in the door. So let's go through the rest of these steps one by one. Make sure that you understand, again, the grant guidelines are essential. Please read them. They're not that long. Um, yeah, it can help you understand all these ownership requirements, eligibility requirements, our funding priorities, how you may or may not meet them, things like that. So it's important to read through. Your pre-application is available on our grants page on our website. This establishes your eligibility to apply and introduces us to your organization and your resource. If we've never heard of you before, this is our introduction, and we will look you up. We'll find out who you are. New this year, we are asking you to, in your full application, give us your website. So right now, make sure you update that website because we will be looking at it. You want to make sure you have current information there. So if that hasn't been done in a while, please update your website. We will be asking for it in your application. The consultant list. All right, so when you submit your pre-application, when I send you back your link to apply, I will also send you a copy of our consultant list. However, it's always a good idea to talk with your consultant earlier rather than later. And if you want that list ahead of time, just let me know and I'd be happy to email it to you. Otherwise, do your pre-application. If everything checks out, I'll send you the list and you can start talking with consultants right away. Again, talk with them early. They get busy. Find yourself a qualified preservation consultant to work on your project. Talk to them about your project and see if it's something that they are qualified to do and willing to do. Go over the current guidelines with them, especially with regard to the documents that you will need from them. So you'll need their resume. We may know them personally, no matter how long we've known this consultant. Our grant review panel may not know them, and we need their current resume. So make sure that they provide a resume. Their scope of work, this is their proposal to you. It will break down the work that they intend to do and what they will charge for it. We want to break down fees from them. So if they say, yeah, sure, we'll do it for $5,000, that's not good enough. We need to know where that $5,000 is going. And we require that breakdown of fees from them. We will score down if you don't provide this. I know it's not your fault. Make sure that you talk with your consultants and make sure they understand this requirement. You will have the opportunity to preview the full grant application before you apply. You'll want to create an account in Smarter Select if you've never applied through Smarter Select before. The link that I send you will take you to this page. And you'll need to click on the Create New Account tab in order to create your account. If you've applied before through Smarter Select, you can just sign into the account that you already have. Once you do that, it will take you to a page like this that explains the grant program that you are applying for. I will send you either the PNY or the TAG grant link to apply, whichever one is appropriate to your project. So if you're not sure, in the pre-application, you'll get a chance to explain your project and choose a project type. If you need help with that, I'm always happy to help with that. But you'll see a page like this that either says Preserve New York or TAG, just to refresh your memory of what you're applying for. And then you'll see a couple of options at the bottom of the page. You can either begin to apply right now by clicking the apply button, or you can preview the application. And I suggest that you do that so that you can get a heads up to what is required. When you preview your application, it'll bring up a pop-up like this, and you can scroll through the entire application without having to fill in anything or click from page to page. It's really handy in that you can also print it. So if you need to share it with your staff or your board or with others on your team, then that's a really easy way to do it and have that paper in hand to review the application. If you are more comfortable filling things in longhand, that's a way too. You can print this out, fill it out longhand, but you will have to type it into the application online in order to submit it because we cannot accept printed applications, emails, US Postal Service, none of that. So it's all done online, but if you want to work on it offline, you can. So it gives you some flexibility. I understand. Okay. One thing you can do in your spare time to work on your application and to get ahead on things is to compile the uploads that are required. So when you preview the application, make a list of the uploads that you're going to need to provide. These include a list of your board members with affiliations. Don't forget their affiliations, it's important. Support letters. So as you receive support letters from your supporters, stash them into a folder on your desktop so that they'll be easy to find when it's time to upload them into your application. Budgets. So we're requiring that these be PDF files only. So if you keep your budget in an Excel file, save it as a PDF ahead of time, and it'll save you some time when it comes time to submit your application, things like that. So stash everything in a folder on your desktop. That way it's handy, you know where it's at, and you have it all ahead of time. You won't be scrambling at the last minute. When it comes to support letters, they're optional, but we do suggest that you get some if you can. Support letters from a broad swath of people that you serve, your neighbors, the people who come to your events, as well as elected officials and town officials. So get a nice mix of support letters. Make sure that they are personalized, specific to this grant application, and ask for them like 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time to give people time to write the letter, but also short enough time that they don't forget about it. Okay. Part of your grant application will require photographs. And we like good photos. So don't cut off parts of your building in your photo, please. Make sure it's straight. And just take good photos. Choose a nice day with good lighting. If you totally suck at taking photos, get somebody who's good at it and bring them out and have them take photos. You can use your cell phone camera, it's fine. But make sure that they're high resolution JPEG photos. Start with kind of a broad view of things first. So if you're focusing on one building, take a good picture of that building, show its context, and then narrow in on the areas of concern. For TAG, we require 5 photos. For Preserve New York, you want to plan on 10. So yeah, you start big, zoom in, make sure that you caption your photos so that we know what we're looking at, and provide credits. Even if it's you're the only person, you're putting together the application, you do everything at your organization. Doesn't matter, put your name on the photos so we know who took them. And please remember, we may never have seen your site before. So when you take your photos, make sure you're showing its context and giving us a good idea of your building or site. The example I like to use is the Seward House Museum in Auburn. If you've never been, you should go. I remember seeing photos of that house in grant applications and picturing it on a hillside somewhere, pastoral and beautiful. It's not. It's in the middle of the city. Not that it's not beautiful, but it is totally different than I expected. When I finally visited, I couldn't believe it. It was plunked down right in the middle of Auburn. It's got acreage and everything, but it's not what I expected. It's okay. I love it. It's just, please provide some context in your photos for people like me who may not have ever been there before. And we do try to make site visits. We can't make it to everyone. Unfortunately, we try. It took me a couple years to get there and see the Seward House Museum in person. But before I did, I just had a really skewed idea of what it looked like. So not their fault, not their fault at all. The photos were beautiful, just something to keep in mind. The more context we have, the better we can analyze your grant application and hopefully get you funded. All right, so the grant applications for TAG and Preserve New York have short answer and long answer questions. So there are some essays that you're going to need to write, nothing major. Again, preview the grant application, you'll be fine. But when you're writing the answers to these questions, be sure and keep in mind the 3 criteria we are going to use to evaluate your grant application. These include historic preservation and project quality, fiscal and managerial, looking at your organization specifically, and your service to the public through that building, through your historic resource, and through the arts and culture. Don't forget. So make sure that when you're describing your use of the building, that's one of the questions. Describe the current use of the building. Think about who accesses the building, How often? What kind of programs do you run? Do you do guided tours? How often do you do those? Who comes to them? Describe your programs with a focus on your arts and cultural programs. We're interested in what you're doing with your building regardless, but keep in mind the intent of these grant programs and make sure that you're giving us a complete picture of how you're using your building. If you're not able to use your building to its fullest right now because of its condition or accessibility or something else, you'll have the opportunity to explain that in your application. So we want to know if you're being prevented from using your building to its fullest for your programs, then tell us why and how this application, how this grant can help. When you describe your project, you will be asked to talk about who this project is really serving. It's not just about fixing your building. It's not just about preserving your building. For whom are you preserving that building? Who are you serving through your organization with that building? And how is this project going to help you do better? Okay, so you're going to have some thoughtful questions to answer, but they're so important to help you really imagine how you can best use your building to meet your mission. So that's what we want to know. Be honest about your project and how it may or may not meet our funding priorities. Again, they are funding priorities. They're not eligibility requirements. So if you don't think that you as an organization or your project meet those priorities, just be honest, but think about them. Okay, think about why we're asking you that. It's important to us. It's important to the field of preservation, to arts and culture. So, don't just dismiss them. Nope, we don't meet these. But if you don't, think about how you might, maybe in the future. All right, wow, budgets. We don't have much time left, but let's talk about budgets. We're going to require an organizational budget. This should be pretty straightforward. You should have it on hand for any grant application that you submit for anybody. So this demonstrates the income and expenses of your organization. This can be complex or it can be simple, depending on the size of your organization. Show us in that organizational budget where your match is coming from. For TAG, that's $500. Where's it coming from? Is it a fundraiser? Is it your operations budget? What is it? So highlight that line and say, this is where our match is coming from. So in the case of Preserve New York, where we're asking for larger matches, you may have to cob together your match. You may have $500 from a board member. You may have to do a fundraiser. You may have a community foundation grant that can provide part of that match. You'll have the opportunity to show that in your project budget, but we do want to see where it's coming from out of your organizational budget because that's money in and money out. So show it to us. For municipalities that are applying, make sure that you don't send us the whole 62-page budget for your municipality, just the one-page summary of income and expenses for that department that's in charge of overseeing the grant application. Here's a sample organizational budget. Don't let it scare you. It's a little more complex than some of our organizations maybe, but it shows where is your money coming from and where is it going to. And down at the bottom, they have a highlighted line to show where their match is coming from. So it's nice and straightforward, pretty much, so we can understand the flow of money through your organization and how it affects your preservation of your building. All right, keep that in mind. All right, the other budget we're going to ask you for is the project budget. This is simple. It's so simple, I almost didn't want to even ask for it, but here it is. You want to include the income for your project. You're doing a historic structure report. It's going to cost $25,000. Your grant request to us is 80% of that. You're allowed to ask for 80% of your project budget. You need to match 20% plus some if you're looking at a really expensive project. So an $80,000 historic structure report, sure, you can ask us for 20 and you have to match the rest. So show us where it's all coming from in your project budget. So the income, your grant request, your match, and any other funding sources you need to equal the project cost. The expenses are the amount of money that your consultant will be paid to complete the report or survey. You should not include any capital expenses for repairs, nothing like that. That's all for the future. Don't even think about it. No, you should think about it, but don't include it in this budget. Expenses, the consultant fees. We want to see a clear breakdown of their fees. That's up to them to provide. Please ask them for it. Breakdown of their project tasks, deliverables, and totals. This will include their hourly rates. And if your consultant's part of a firm and there'll be, say, 3 people working on the project and they have different hourly rates, you'll see that in their breakdown. So here's an example of a project budget. And it shows that breakdown here. They spend some time coordinating with your organization. They conduct a site visit, research and writing, and you can see that they're specifying who in their firm is going to be working on that, whether it's the senior associate or clerical staff. Here, different hourly rate, you know, and they break it down to equal that project cost. Up here, the project income, their tag request. This is back when we were asking for a 20% cash match back months ago. So now it would be $500 cash match. And then how you're making up the difference. All right. Pretty straightforward. It's really, really simple. The project budget is simple. Just make sure it contains these components. All right. Now I cannot stress this enough. Please proofread your application or have someone proofread it for you. You're working hard. You're doing lots of things, wearing lots of hats. I totally get it. Please, please have someone read your application before you submit it. One thing that we've run into with these applications in the Smarter Select is that if your browser has autofill, it may autofill incorrectly. So please go through and make sure it's doing it correctly. We ask for your county. This is important for our record keeping, and it messes us up if it says that you are in New York County when you're not in New York County. So sometimes it will autofill to New York for county. So please double check that. If you're not in New York County, put your county. It's a drop down, so you get to choose your county, but please make sure that's correct. Make sure your email address is correct. Wow, I cannot stress this enough. If I need to tell you that you got a grant, you want to hear that good news, and I cannot get it to you if your email address is incorrect. I've seen it. I've seen it happen. Every year I get bounce backs. Now I got to figure it out. So please make sure your email address is correct. Your mailing address is correct too, so we can get your check to you when you get your grant. Your official contact person. So we ask for 2 contact people in Preserve, New York, not for tag, because they're simple. It should just be 1 person. But for Preserve New York, we have official contact and we have project contact, and they can be the same person in your organization, but this should be a person who can sign checks, receive the check that we send you and sign it, communicate with your consultant. That might be your project contact, right? Your operations manager, maybe. The official contact, it's usually for a municipality, a mayor or a clerk, somebody who can speak to this grant publicly, issue statements and announcements and things like that. So make sure that you're putting the proper person down for that, because nothing's more disheartening than to say, hey, you got the grant, and have them say, well, you know, you really need to tell so-and-so that. No. When we communicate about your grant, we will be communicating with your official contact person. Okay, keep that in mind. Make sure that your uploads are the correct files. Errors sometimes happen. You upload, oops, the wrong thing, and you can't delete it. And you're like, oh crap, you know. No, don't worry. You cannot delete uploads, but you can replace them. So if you accidentally put your project budget where the organizational budget belongs and you're freaking out because you can't delete it, just replace it with the proper file. Okay, it's just a replacement. Yeah, we see that every year. It's scary when it happens, but just replace it. Okay. Yeah, again, get somebody to read through it. If you need help with Smarter Select, call me. I'll walk you through it. It's not difficult, but it can be kind of weird sometimes. So submit your application. Speaking of Smarter Select, submit it early. Please don't hit submit at 4:59 p.m. the day that it's due, because you and 10 other people are going to do that, and it's going to cause technical glitches. It happens every time. So please, please plan to submit your application early. Our applications are always due on a Friday evening so that you do not have to spend your weekend working on it, at least not that weekend. So make sure you do it early so you can knock off early on Friday and celebrate. So we cannot accept emailed applications, handwritten applications, mailed applications, or any of your grant application materials that way. So if you're having a hard time uploading what you need to upload, don't just email it to me and say, oh, well, here's this, couldn't upload it. No. I can't do it. I'm not allowed to accept things that way. So please make sure you upload the proper things in your application. If you have a hard time with it, let me know and I will help you through it. Okay, so everything has to be submitted through Smarter Select. All right, the way that we evaluate your applications is through a panel of professionals in the field of preservation, art, museums, history. We have some of our consultants serve on our panels from time to time, every time, actually. We always try to have a diverse panel of experts look at your applications. I do not get to vote on them. I don't get to score applications at all. So you can buy me dinner if you want, but it's not going to help your cause. We hand these off to a panel to score them. We provide guidance to the panels, so I can answer their questions about your organization or your project if I know more than they do, but really try to make your case in your application. Don't assume that just because I know you, that information will come through to the panel. Make sure that you're talking to the panel in your application. These are people you don't know who they are. You need to convince them that you meet the eligibility. You need to convince them of your arts and cultural focus. You need to make your case to them. I already know you, maybe, but they don't. So, okay, just so you're clear on that, I don't get to vote, but I do get to clarify and I get to help you put your best foot forward with your application. That's what I'm here for. We focus on the 3 criteria. Those are spelled out and defined and expanded upon in the grant guidelines. So please read through and see how you might meet those criteria and make your case accordingly. Your applications go through staff review. We don't score them, but we do review them. We hand them off to the panel for them to review and score. The funders, our funders also look at these. So NISCA, Gardner, Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area, they help vet these applications too. They're so supportive of what we're trying to do with TAG and P&Y. But they weigh in. Okay, so keep that in mind. You should always keep in mind, where is the money coming from for these grants, for any grant you apply for, not just ours. Always know where the money comes from so that you can understand why they might want to fund your project. It's important. All right, so you should hear from us in about 12 weeks after the application deadline. It takes a long time to turn these around sometimes. We'll get back to you sooner if we can, but look for about a 12-week turnaround. If you do not get approved for a grant, don't go away. Please call me for feedback. If you want to know why, if you want to know how you can improve your application for next time or turn to another funder if you're not a good fit, I will help you. So please feel free to reach out for feedback, but do it, pretty soon after you hear so that I remember. So that I can bring up my notes and talk with you about your application. I'm always available for your questions. Leave a voicemail if you need to. I've added my work cell phone here, the 518-810-6090 number. You can text if you'd like. Why not? It's the 21st century. We can all communicate that way. Just tell me who you are when you send me messages. Anyway, for quick questions, sometimes that's the best way. Email, call, text, whatever. Always happy to help. The deadline for pre-applications is April 11th. So you want to get your pre-application in well in advance. You don't want to wait till the last minute, but just in case, April 11th is the last day pre-applications are accepted. And then the full application is due on Friday, April 18th. So you can check out our website for grant guidelines, full information on our grant programs and other programs that we offer as well. And I really appreciate you all bearing with me for this rather long webinar. I'm going to take one more look at the questions before we call it a day. We've got 4 minutes left. And I've got a few questions here. Um, uh, what I have, yes, yes. So my phone number is there. I think you probably already saw that. When are you going to announce the Preserve NYS list? So we announce our grants usually, I don't know. I mean, we coordinate with our grantees to make public announcements. So, you know, the announcement for this round will probably take place in July, just, you know, thereabouts. So you'll find out, and then you can make a public announcement once we coordinate with you on that. But you will find out if you got these grants in July. That's the short answer. So I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much for joining me, and good luck to everybody. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. All right. Have a great day. And thanks for supporting the Preservation League. Bye-bye.